Hello, my name is Kat Borowsky, and I am studying English at the University of Oregon, and I am a 2026 recipient of the Cure Undergraduate Conference Travel Award. I will be discussing the poem Requiem for the Croppies by Seamus Heaney and its ties to the second line tradition in New Orleans, Louisiana. I began this research while studying abroad at University of Galway in Ireland in a modern Irish literature course. There, I had the opportunity to analyze several of Seamus Heaney's poems. Seamus Heaney was a poet and playwright from the north of Ireland who won a Nobel Peace Prize in Literature. In 1966, to honor the 50th anniversary of the 1916 Easter Rising, Heaney wrote one of his most powerful poems, Requiem for the Croppies. The poem was written during the Troubles, yet another period of intense struggle between Irish and British forces. Rather than write about the battles of his present-day Ireland in the 1960s, Heaney put his reader into the eyes and heads of the Irish fighters who participated in the same struggle for freedom almost 200 years prior. In my studies in Galway, I was struck by what Heaney chose to focus on in his writing and how he framed difficult and traumatic parts of Irish history, including his description of the Croppies and the Battle of Vinegar Hill. In my research, I looked into cultural and historical context that Heaney relied on to write his poems. Croppy was a nickname for the United Irishmen rebels after their short haircuts, inspired by the French rebels during the French Revolution. The Croppies fought during the Irish Rebellion of 1798, in which the United Irishmen organized a nationwide revolt against British rule. The Croppies were a volunteer army, largely made up of farmers and townspeople. They were underarmed and poorly prepared, with little to no training and few firearms to fight against the well-armed and well-funded British troops. The most famous battle in the Irish Rebellion of 1798 was the Battle of Vinegar Hill. Taking place near Enniscorthy in County Wexford, 16,000 United Irishmen rebels faced off against 13,000 British troops. Although the United Irishmen had more fighters, they were wildly underprepared. As described earlier, the United Irishmen weren't trained soldiers, and they were largely armed with homemade weapons like pikes. Going up against one of the largest and most powerful militaries of the time, the Croppies were fighting a losing battle. Despite their poor odds, the Croppies still fought boldly. The British troops overwhelmed the United Irishmen, crushing their forces. The Battle of Vinegar Hill became the last major engagement between the United Irishmen and the British military, and the Croppies were remembered for their crushing defeat rather than their bravery and heroism. Through my analysis, I researched the history of Ireland, learning about the determination and perseverance that the Irish people showed through centuries of rebellion. Ireland was first invaded by British colonizers in 1169 and spent the next 800 years under English occupation and subjugation. The Irish language, traditional dress, culture, economy, and agricultural practice were all suppressed and outlawed under British rule, relegating them to second-class citizenship in their own land. However, the Irish people refused to submit to the English colonial power. Irish freedom fighters initiated countless rebellions and uprisings, including the Irish Rebellion of 1798, in which Heaney's poem takes place. That determination was not for nothing, as today, 26 of the 32 counties of Ireland are now free, independent from English control. 6 counties remain under English rule, and the people of Ireland still carry on their calls for a free and united nation. Seamus Heaney's poem is powerful because it reframes the battle in 1798, turning it from a defeat into a show of nationalist pride. Rather than focusing on British troops or the Croppies' defeat, Heaney emphasized their bravery and resilience, how the Croppies learned to fight on the fly and used their environment to their advantage. Rather than allowing history to be written by the victors, Heaney emphasized the Croppies' toughness, their grit, their belief in the dream of Irish independence. My research evolved when I returned to this poem for the Sigma Tau Delta Honors English Society Convention that was taking place in New Orleans, Louisiana. The theme of the conference was Second Lines and New Beginnings, looking at the second line tradition in New Orleans, which came out of New Orleans jazz performance, named after the line of brass musicians and dancers who followed a funeral procession which made up the first line. However, the tradition evolved out of a form of monetary support for Black communities. Systemic oppression and white supremacy disenfranchised Black Americans, denying them jobs, insurance, loans. They found other ways to support themselves and each other, including the second line. The musical performance acted as community fundraisers for people in need, going towards building homes, supporting recently freed slaves, or acting as a loan payment. The money earned through the second line went into building up the community, ensuring that the first, second, and every line could continue. Today, the second line is a form of celebration following weddings and funerals and is a core part of the Mardi Gras festival that New Orleans is known for. However, it came out of a hard-fought history of determination, of rebuilding, of continuing in the face of adversity. When I heard about the conference theme, I remembered the determination of the Croppies and the Irish people. The battle was one line of an ongoing war, with the end goal of rebuilding the Irish community and country, giving future lines a chance at freedom. In Requiem for the Croppies, Seamus Heaney repeatedly returned to the image and idea of Barley, its cyclical nature representing a recurrent second line. The Croppies were largely farmers and peasants pulled from their fields to fight. Heaney recognized and honored this, using the cyclical nature of grain as a metaphor for the recurrent and continuous fight for freedom the Irish people faced. In the opening of the poem, Heaney described the Croppies, the pockets of their greatcoats full of barley. The grain they once used to sow their crops became their only form of food as they fled from British troops. Once the Croppies were slaughtered, buried without shroud or coffin, the barley in their pockets took root. The blood and bodies of the fallen soldiers fed the barley that grew up out of their graves, barley that would go on to feed the next generation of fighters, each line leading to the next, successive links in a chain. Even the structure of Heaney's sonnet was written to evoke the idea of the second line, open-ended and continuing, denying the reader a clear ending. Requiem for the Croppies follows the pattern of a Shakespearean sonnet up until the closing couplet. Rather than breaking from the rhyme scheme established in the third quatrain, as Shakespearean sonnets usually do, Heaney continued the rhyme through the last two lines, leaving it indeterminate, unfixed. While the Battle of Vinegar Hill was lost, the future of the Irish people was not fixed. The Croppies were one line in many in the Irish people's history of determination, rebuilding, continuing. One line after another demanding independence. Thank you for your time.